There is a painting that spent 25 years lying in total darkness behind a heavy oak door at Windsor Castle. For over 2 decades, the world moved on. Seasons changed, governments rose and fell. But inside those ancient walls, a silent erasure was strictly enforced. Then, in a single night, the heavy doors finally swung open. 2 members of the most powerful family in Britain walked that canvas back out into the light. Prince William had spent months meticulously pulling off something that had been building inside him for a quarter of a century. It was a calculated, flawless trap, an operation executed in complete silence. But the fallout that shattered the morning peace the very next day was not just because of the portrait, it was because of what Princess Anne did next. The reaction was immediate. It was visceral. Queen Camilla was left standing in a grand, sunlit corridor, completely gobsmacked. A teacup reportedly rattled against its saucer before shattering on the marble floor. She watched 25 years of careful, methodical work unravel in mere seconds. She ran straight to King Charles. She demanded he fix it. She demanded he tear the canvas down and discipline everyone involved. Only to discover a terrifying truth. She had absolutely no power to stop any of it. William built the architecture of this moment. He ticked every institutional box. He layered every historical precedent. He designed a legal fortress so airtight that nobody on earth could undo his mother's return, not even the king. But then Anne moved. She did one thing at the very end that was nowhere in William's pristine plan. A move nobody had scheduled, a face-to-face confrontation nobody had prepared for. Hi viewers, do you believe a son has the right to avenge his mother's legacy no matter how many decades have passed, or should the past just stay buried? Let me know your quick answer down in the comments right now. It landed on Camilla harder than any painting ever could. It stunned the entire nation when the raw details finally leaked. And from what palace insiders quietly confirmed behind closed doors, it stunned William too. Before we go deeper into the cold corridors of this family, you need to understand the deep, festering wound sitting underneath this entire war, because none of what happened that morning makes a single bit of sense without it. There is a specific portrait of Princess Diana that the public has barely ever seen up close. It was painted when she was at the absolute height of her warmth, her beauty, and her unmatched connection with ordinary people. Those who were in the room when Diana first saw the finished canvas say she stood in front of it in total silence. A specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when something captures exactly who you are. That portrait was always destined to hang in the Hall of Matriarchs. It is the most sacred ceremonial space in the entire royal residence. A towering wall, reserved strictly for the women who truly shaped the modern monarchy. Diana never saw it hang there. She lost her life before the honor could be formalized. And almost immediately after she was gone, something deeply unsettling happened inside those palace walls. While the public wept on the streets, while a sea of flowers covered the iron gates, the internal mechanisms of the palace began to ruthlessly strip away her memory. A private ledger, kept securely in the royal archives for 3 decades to track high-value assets and deeply personal effects, was recently discovered, completely open, on a mahogany desk in the West Wing. Its primary wax seal was shattered. Pages documenting the exact relocations of Diana's most precious remaining items had been physically removed, and the person who quietly ordered those pages, destroyed decades ago, was about to be dragged out of the shadows and into the blinding light of day. Within hours of Diana's passing on the 31st of August 1997, the public world and the private world inside those palace gates fractured completely. Outside, the streets of London filled with an overwhelming, unprecedented grief. Millions wept openly. A carpet of millions of flowers stretched across the iron gates. On the other side of those gates, the atmosphere was colder. It was calculating. Insiders have long reported that among the very first concerns raised in those frantic hours was not how to honor her memory. It was how quickly her influence could be contained. Property was catalogued. Personal spaces were evaluated, and then came the systemic erasure. Camilla had spent years in the shadows as the hidden woman. Now, as the dust began to settle, She moved into the spaces Diana had once called home, but this was not simply moving in. It was a complete purging of identity. Diana loved fresh flowers. She picked them herself to bring life into the cold stone rooms. Reportedly, instructions were issued for those arrangements to be taken away and destroyed. Not replaced, destroyed. There is a vast difference between clearing a room and setting fire to its contents. Then came the master bedroom, the room where Diana had raised her young sons, the room where she had wept in private when the pressure became too heavy. The order came down for that room to be locked permanently, sealed off like a stain you cover with heavy furniture, rather than clean. Her personal belongings were boxed up and moved into deep storage. Her images began disappearing from official corridors. It did not happen overnight. That was the genius of it. One frame moved to a quieter hallway, a second frame taken down for restoration and never returned. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, the walls were already bare. That is how you erase a legacy without ever issuing a public decree. You do it in pieces, so small that complaining about any single frame makes you look unreasonable. The Hall of Matriarchs never received Diana's portrait. The most beloved royal woman of the modern era was left in total darkness because her presence made one person deeply uncomfortable. Prime ministers walked past that empty space, foreign heads of state walked past it, and a young boy watched it happen. Prince William was just 15 when he walked behind his mother's coffin down the mall. He kept his face completely still under the glare of global cameras, but he was not a child who was blind to the politics around him. He knew why his family had fractured. He carried that weight quietly. As he grew older, he watched Camilla move through his mother's former home. He saw the empty spaces on the walls. Inside, the indignation grew, even as he maintained perfect public protocol. At 16, he reportedly let the mask slip in private. He voiced what he saw as a systematic dismantling of his mother's place in the family. He believed she had been pushed further and further to the margins until she was left entirely unprotected. He held those thoughts closely for 25 years. He shook hands. He stood in group photographs. He supported institutional decisions with a straight face. He waited until he had the authority to act. He understood a crucial lesson very early in life. Speaking out prematurely achieves nothing except temporary satisfaction. Real change requires absolute power. Then, an unexpected handwritten document surfaced from a private archive. A letter detailing explicit instructions about institutional displacement that had sat untouched for decades. And William realized he was not the only one in the family who had been holding their breath. Princess Anne carried her own quiet history. Decades before Camilla entered the main royal narrative, she was married to Andrew Parker Bowles. But before that marriage took place, Andrew had been in a serious relationship with Anne. They were close. Marriage was openly discussed. But institutional rules of the era intervened due to religious protocols, and Anne stepped back without a single public complaint. She did what she has done her entire life, put duty first. Shortly after, Camilla married Andrew in 1973. Anne sat in the pews, composed, dignified, fulfilling her role precisely as required. She went to the reception. She never uttered a single negative word in public about what that moment meant to her. She did not create scenes. She filed details away. She watched Camilla become the central figure in her brother's life. She watched the fallout destroy the family's stability. And over the decades, she maintained a legendary, impenetrable distance. Reports suggest Camilla was always deeply intimidated by the Princess Royal. Anne's legendary composure was impossible to break. It was not a feud of shouting matches or public subtle digs. It was a cold, absolute silence. A greeting in the morning, and nothing else for the rest of the day. Perfect protocol, zero intimacy. Anne also watched Diana's memory get swept under the rug. She saw the portrait vanish. She saw the empty spot in the Hall of Matriarchs year after year. Two people inside the institution wanted the exact same wrong corrected. One was the heir to the throne. The other was the most respected, disciplined member of the older generation. The alliance was inevitable. William did not plan a loud rebellion. He spent months consulting with royal curators and historical experts. He pulled archival records on portrait placement precedents, stretching back over a century. Every legal box was checked. Every institutional requirement was satisfied. He built a strategy so technically perfect that once the portrait was placed, no administrative maneuver could legally remove it. The night before the installation, William placed a short phone call to his aunt. Neither needed a long conversation. Anne simply noted that the restoration of history was long overdue. William confirmed the timing. The call lasted less than a minute. Decades of silence transformed into 30 seconds of absolute alignment. Camilla had no idea. She believed her place on the walls, in the family, and in history was permanently secured. She had the titles. She had the crown. She had the residence arranged to her exact preferences. She was about to discover how quickly an illusion of total control can shatter. A high-level engagement had been scheduled for Camilla outside of London that afternoon. It was not random timing. Her schedule had been carefully mapped to ensure she would be hours away from Windsor Castle until the operation was complete and irreversible. While she was away, the Hall of Matriarchs was closed for routine maintenance. Only a tiny, vetted group of staff was allowed inside. No press releases were drafted. No media alerts were issued. Total operational secrecy was maintained. In the early evening, a large wrapped canvas was brought up from the subterranean storage vaults. Staff handled it with extreme care, moving slowly through the grand corridors. Princess Anne arrived in person. She did not need to be there. The protocols were set. The curators knew their job, but she insisted on personally witnessing the moment. The protective coverings were removed. For the first time in over 25 years, the striking portrait of Princess Diana emerged into the light inside Windsor Castle. Anne stood in the middle of the room, silently looking at the image of the young woman who had once captured the world's heart. The placement was measured to the millimeter. The heavy frame was secured tightly onto the gallery wall, positioned directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. When the team stepped back, the room fell completely silent. No speeches were made. No champagne was poured. Anne looked at the wall, her expression completely unreadable, and quietly remarked that Diana had finally returned to where she belonged. That was it. A quiet statement in an empty room, correcting a 25-year absence. Across London, Camilla was fast asleep, totally unaware that the visual landscape of the monarchy had just been permanently altered. The next morning, Camilla returned to Windsor, expecting a standard day on her schedule. She walked into the central wing, heard the quiet chatter among the household staff, and stepped into the gallery. The reaction was immediate. Witnesses describe a moment of absolute shock. The composure she had maintained for years vanished instantly. She immediately demanded the portrait be taken down. She called for an emergency intervention from the king. She demanded the names of every staff member who had granted access to the storage vaults. Every single request was flatly denied. The staff stood their ground, citing official archival authority and direct clearance from the Prince of Wales. For the first time since entering the royal family, Camilla found herself completely blocked by the very administrative apparatus she had relied on for decades. She turned directly to King Charles, expecting him to overrule the decision, as he had done so many times in the past. Charles sat in his study. He looked at the paperwork. He listened to the fierce objections, and he said absolutely nothing. He did not issue a counter-order. He did not call the curators. He simply allowed his son's decision to stand. It was a devastating silence. Charles recognized that challenging William on this issue would spark an institutional crisis he could not win. He chose the stability of the crown and the respect of his heir over an escalating conflict inside his own home. Camilla realized in that exact moment that the tide of internal influence had officially turned. Just as the reality of the situation was settling in, the double doors of the room opened. Princess Anne walked in alone. No aides followed her. No formal announcements were made. She walked with the steady, measured pace that has defined her decades of public service. She walked right up to Camilla. The room was silent. The air was thick with tension. Anne looked at her sister-in-law, kept her posture perfectly straight, and delivered 5 quiet words that brought decades of unspoken friction to her absolute head. It is what she deserved. She did not wait for a response. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned around and walked out of the room, leaving the statement hanging in the air like an unyielding verdict. It was a moment of complete clarity. The long-standing effort to minimize Diana's place in the physical history of the castle had officially failed. In the days that followed, the internal dynamic shifted rapidly. Diana's legacy patronages, long kept at a distance from official press releases, began appearing again in state communications. Her name began featuring prominently in historical retrospectives released by the palace. The portrait remained firmly on the wall of the Hall of Matriarchs beside Queen Elizabeth, seen by every visiting dignitary, foreign leader, and future generation. William achieved what he set out to do 25 years ago, not through public outbursts or media battles, but through patient, methodical adherence to the rules of the institution he will one day command. And Princess Anne ensured that the final mark on that history was clear, dignified, and entirely undeniable. The balance of power inside the ancient walls has been permanently redefined, proving that while history can be hidden for a time, it can never be erased forever. Thank you for watching this episode of Royal Family Series. If this deep dive into palace dynamics resonated with you, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe right now so you never miss an update. Next time, we pull back the curtain on a newly uncovered private journal belonging to the late Queen Elizabeth herself. Hidden in the vaults of Balmoral for over 3 decades, its final entry contains a shocking 5-word warning about the future of the crown that was kept from the public until now. You cannot afford to miss what was written on that last page. See you in the next video.